Today, we gather under a powerful theme, 70 years of courage. We honor the women who marched and we speak about empowering women who lead today. And perhaps on the 15th anniversary of Healing Hands Community Project, there is another phrase on this program that deserves our attention. That phrase is that we still care. Courage and care. My son's name is Diani. When he was born, I didn't know what to name him. And I came across a young girl whose name was Diani, and I asked my mother-in-law. I thought I wanted something exotic, you know. And I heard the name Diani for the first time. And I went to my mother-in-law, and this girl is also Tonga. I asked my mother-in-law, what does Diani mean? And my mother said, Diani means Qinani, be strong. In Xitsonga. And I was like, yeah, that's what I need to be. To become a new mom. I need to clean up. So I'm gonna name this girl Diani. Diani in English would be not just strong, but it would mean courage as well. And so Healing Hands speaks to being courageous and to caring. And so I want to speak about both those two things today. Because for 70 years we have celebrated the courage of South African women. But perhaps we have not spoken enough about the cost of that courage. And I will tell you what I named this speech, what I titled it. I said in 1976, 56, we know that 20,000 women marched the Union Building against the pass laws. And among their leaders were 4 women who we saw on all of our posters, whose faces surround us today. We know about Lerato Ngobeni. In fact, when I got to the airport, there's a new book that is out. I bought it. It's a new book about Lerato Ngobeni that is out. I'm going to read it, and I'm definitely sure it's going to bring me to tears. We all know about Helen Joseph. We know about Rahima Musa. We know about Sophie Williams-Dubois, who's the only survivor of this march, who's still alive today. These were different women. They came from different backgrounds. They have different histories, but they were united by one conviction. Because there comes a time when a moment of silence becomes more dangerous than speaking. And from that extraordinary moment came words which have traveled through generations of South African women. You heard Umama Wati Watinda Bafazi? Translated, you strike a woman, you strike a rock. 70 years later, I want to honor those words, but I also want to interrogate what we have done with those words. Because in my own life, I have reached a point as a woman where I'm prepared to say, I am not a rock. I am a woman, and there is a difference. When those women said Imbogoto, it was a warning to an oppressive apartheid government. It meant you will not break us. It meant you will not intimidate us. It meant you will not make us disappear. That was a revolutionary statement. But somewhere over these 70 years, I fear that we have turned a revolutionary declaration into a job description for women. We now expect women to be rocks. When a woman raises children alone, like we said, what Dr. Trolley said earlier, we even raise women alone even when we are married. We raise women alone. We say Imbogoto. When she holds the family together financially, we say Imbogoto. When she survives an abusive relationship, we say Imbogoto. When she buries someone she loves and someone somehow finds the strength to continue, we say Imbogoto. When she's sexually harassed and still has to return to that workplace, we say Imbogoto. When she enters politics like I have and is attacked in ways that many of her male colleagues will seldom experience, we say Imbogoto. When we are exhausted, but nobody and everybody still depends on us, we say Imbogoto. When we have become extraordinarily good at congratulating women for surviving things they should never have been required to endure. And so, 70 years after that historic march, perhaps the question our generation must ask is, when do we stop praising women for carrying the weight and start asking, who keeps putting that weight on our shoulders? Because I am not a rock. A rock does not become tired. A rock does not grieve or cry. A rock does not need tenderness. A rock does not need protection. A rock does not need to ask for help. A rock does not need to weigh. A rock simply absorbs whatever is thrown at it. Women should not have to. And perhaps that is why the other part of today's occasion matters so deeply to me. So Healing Hands says, we still care. And I believe that matters. Because courage without care eventually becomes exhaustion. Strength without support becomes loneliness. And resilience without justice simply teaches people that women can be burdened indefinitely, because somehow we will cope. I don't want the next generation of women to merely cope. I want them to thrive. And while we commemorate these 70 years since the 1956 historic resistance of those women, women have always been at the forefront of the human struggle. Sometimes history remembered their names. Sometimes it remembered the men standing beside them, like Colin. Sometimes it deliberately forgets them. So long before 1956, I want us to remind ourselves, there was Queen Nzinga Ndongo and Matamba. She was a queen in the 17th century Angola who confronted the Portuguese colonial expansion through diplomacy. She was a warrior, and she built political alliances. This queen understood power. She negotiated with power. And when negotiation failed, she resisted power. Here in South Africa, who will ever forget Queen Nandi, a woman who enjoyed rejection, humiliation, displacement, yet whose influence became inseparable from one of the most consequential periods in the history of the Zulu kingdom. Let me take you to Nigeria. In 1929, there were thousands of women who rose against British colonial authority in what became the Aba Women's War. For years, colonial history described this war as a riot. But think about the language that we're using here. When governments organize, we call it administration. When political parties organize, we call it mobilization. When armies organize, we call it strategy. When African women organize against the British government and unjust colonial system, they called it a riot. But those women communicated across communities. They mobilized, they confronted warrant chiefs, they challenged taxation, they challenged the restructuring of traditional authority that was diminishing women's political influence. That was not a riot. That was politics. And there is something important in that distinction. Women have not been waiting for somebody to invite us into history. We have always been making that history ourselves. And then we crossed the Atlantic over into a world that educated me, to the American Civil Rights Movement. Everyone remembers Rosa Parks, the woman who would not move from sitting on the bus that was meant to be for white people. But Rosa Parks was not simply a tired woman who spontaneously decided not to give up her seat. She was an activist. She understood exactly what resistance meant. Then there was Ella Baker, who organized quietly but profoundly and believed that movements develop through leadership and to depend on people. These are women across the world whom I admire profoundly. And how can I forget the wife of Malcolm X, the Honorable Dr. Betty Shabazz. When Malcolm X died, Betty was left with 6 children to raise on her own. But she witnessed a period in her life after the assassination of her husband, and she decided to continue with her education. She built a career, and she became an educator in her own right, and that's today we call her the Honorable Betty Shabazz. There's another woman, there's many women who inspire me across the globe, but there's a woman called Benazir Bhutto. You remember Benazir Bhutto in Palestine? She was killed, she was assassinated. She entered politics where that culture was dominated by men, where women could not do anything as in the Muslim society. Whatever we have, the view that we have of the politics of that day and in that country, millions of girls in that country saw something that had previously been prevented to them as something that was possible. A woman occupying the highest political office in their land. And then there's Angela Merkel, who became the Chancellor of Germany. Her leadership is different. She's one that I admire the most because she's the opposite of me. She's methodical, she's measured, she has intellectual discipline. She did not need to eliminate, to imitate, or to perform in the ways that masculine power performs. And so then, I come to our here dear land. And how can I not speak about a woman who I have admired and whom without I would have never been an educated woman, Mamuni Madikizela Mandela. She's from here, different Without Mamuni, I would have never been educated. When the United States wanted to honor South Africa and wanted to honor Mamuni, they brought a scholarship, a full scholarship here to South Africa for us to be able to go to the United States. Of course, we had to apply. I applied, I succeeded, and I was one of the first Winnie Mandela scholars that was afforded by Duke Energy, which is the equivalent of ESCOM here in South Africa, in North Carolina. And so through her own struggle, generations of us were able to get a step up. I lost my mother when I was 14, I lost my dad when I was 20, and so there was no way out for me. And Mamuni's work transcended the Atlantic Ocean, and they came here to fetch us, those of us who were eager enough, who were courageous enough, who were determined enough to want to go over there. And one of the key questions they asked us is, if we educate you, how are you going to use that education to give back to your country? And mine is exactly what I'm doing today. I'm very proud of it. And so, here's where I believe we must now go. I believe that when 1956, the women of 1956, and what those of us in 2026 must confront 70 years later. 70 years is long enough for us to begin to ask very, very difficult questions. The women of 1956 did not march so that we can have their photographs, decorate our posters in Women's Month or during Women's Month, on our invitations, on our television screens, on parliament and government's big events. They marched because they wanted the conditions of women's lives to change. And so after their 70 years of struggle, what have we done with their courage? We know Women sit in parliament like I do. We sit on the bench, which is the judiciary. We become judges. We run companies. We lead universities. We command institutions. We build businesses. We lead communities. And all of this progress, I think we all can agree it matters. But we cannot celebrate representation while ignoring our realities. Yes, women can occupy our boardrooms, but we can still fear going home. A girl can have the constitutional equality and still feel unsafe walking to school. A woman can have the vote and still have no economic independence. A woman can have qualifications and still find that when she speaks with authority, she is judged differently from a man sitting beside her. And politics does not escape this. That's my world. A woman who seeks leadership is called ambitious. A woman who speaks firmly, a man who speaks firmly, is called decisive. A woman who speaks firmly is called difficult. A man who builds alliances is called strategic. A woman who builds alliances is plotting. A man who disagrees is principled. A woman who disagrees is emotional. 70 years later, Lerato Ngobeni stood at the Union buildings. Women still encounter institutions that welcome our presence more than they welcome our power. And that is the next struggle, in my view, because I don't want us to merely be present in these spaces. I want us to be powerful. There is a difference between being present and being powerful. Representation can make or take and put us at the table. But at one of our events, as ActionSA, I said, we don't want to be at the table, we want to build our own table. Power allows us to change what happens at the table. I want us to determine budgets. I want us to write legislation that speaks to our own lived realities. I want us to own property. I want us to create wealth. I want us to shape technology. I want us to lead political movements. I want us to determine the future of our communities. And I want us to make decisions about our own lives. That is true empowerment. But there's a difficult conversation that we as women must have with ourselves. Not every obstacle in our path is the work of a man. Sometimes another woman will guard the door. We know about gatekeeping. We know about competition. We know what happens when someone says, I struggled to get here. Therefore, you must struggle too. Those who know these women's big things, you know what I mean. Because we went through trauma, everybody else must go through trauma. I say no to that. They also say, if I had to break down the door to enter a room, my responsibility is not to repair that door behind me. My responsibility, in my view, is that we must hold that door open for each other. Our suffering cannot become an inheritance that we pass from generation to generation. We must mentor women. We must recommend women. We must sponsor women, ourselves as women. We don't have to be sponsored by men all the time. We must introduce women to somebody who can change their lives in our different communities. Introduce one woman to somebody who you know can change her life. We must correct one another when it's necessary, but let us not humiliate one another. Let us defend each other when the other one is not in the room. Let's not celebrate when another woman is being spoken about and she's not in the room. Let us share information. Let us share opportunity. And sometimes we must say the simplest words that another woman would love to hear. And those words are, I see that you are capable. Come with me. Let me help you. That is how 70 years of courage becomes another 70 years of courage. I'm about to close. There is a word I want us to reclaim today. There is a word I want us as women to reclaim today. That word is dangerous. Because society loves powerful women as long as our power remains harmless. We celebrate outspoken women like me until we speak about something they would prefer remains hidden. We celebrate ambitious women until they compete for the same position as the men. We celebrate independent women until our independence changes the balance of power. You know this, that you can leave home and be a powerful woman, leave your home and go to work, be a powerful woman, and then go home and you are told, this is not the boardroom. But consider the women that we are here to celebrate today. Lilian Ngoyi was dangerous to apartheid. Rahima Musa was dangerous to apartheid. Helen Joseph was dangerous to apartheid. Sophie DeBrain was dangerous to apartheid. The women of Aba in Nigeria was dangerous to colonial authority. Queen Nzinga was dangerous to the Portuguese Empire. Rosa Parks was dangerous to American segregation. Wangari Maathai was dangerous to authoritarianism in Kenya. Winnie Madikizela Mandela was dangerous to the apartheid government. Audre Lorde, who's one of my absolute favorite poets, was dangerous to silence. And every one of them disturbed something. That is why we remember them. They looked at the world they inherited and said, this cannot remain as it is. And perhaps I say that with pride because it's something that Geraldine James, we all know, the angry woman in the ad hoc committee. She always says, and so she says that with passion and pride. I'm glad to represent her today. She's not in the room. I'm representing her. Clock it. And so Audre Lorde gave us words that I believe belong in every woman's life. Audre Lorde said, your silence will not protect you. Women understand silence. We are taught it early. Don't embarrass the family. Don't make trouble. Don't be difficult. Don't be ambitious. Don't challenge authority. Don't say you want that position. You mustn't say that. Don't say you deserve better. Don't expose what happens behind closed doors. Don't ever, ever say you are tired. And for goodness sake, never say no. Don't say enough. Don't smile. Just absorb. Carry, continue, be imbogodo. But here is the problem. You can remain silent and still be attacked. You can remain silent and still be excluded. You can remain silent and still be betrayed. You can remain silent and still lose. And so eventually, the question we must ask ourselves, if my silence cannot protect me, then what exactly am I protecting by remaining silent? And so, the women we are celebrating today, they spoke, they organized, they marched, and then extraordinarily, they sat at the union buildings in silence. But theirs was not a silence of fear. It was organized silence, disciplined silence, political silence. The kind of silence so powerful that a government could hear it. There is a profound difference between choosing silence as an instrument of power and having silence imposed upon you. And so today, I honor all of these women, all of these Mbogotos, every mother who stretched her salary beyond mathematics. I honor every grandmother who held her family together. I honor every woman who entered a workplace that did not want her. Every one of us who resisted. Every one of us who has marched. Give it up for Jacinta Ngobeni. But I refuse to romanticize our suffering. I don't want our daughters to inherit our pain. We don't want them to not be proud of their womanhood. We must want more for them. We must want them to understand money. We must have girls who own things. We must have girls who build things. We must have girls who inherit things. Please, let's leave something for our children. We must have girls who lead. We must have girls who understand their history. Girls who know that they never have to become rocks in order to deserve respect. Because I am not a rock. I want something infinitely more interesting. I am human. I can hurt and still fight. We can grieve and still lead. We can love and still demand respect. We can be afraid and still speak. I can become exhausted and rest without surrendering. I can fall, I can change, I can rebuild, and I can begin again. That is not weakness. And that is why we still care. And to the women of Healing Hands, with Healing Hands, the people of Healing Hands, I want to say, perhaps the We Care movement is exactly what the next chapter of the women's struggle requires. The women before us and the women who are working at Healing Hands, at ActionSA, at all of the different political society and also civil society in our communities. These women give us courage. Our responsibility is to build a society where we no longer require extraordinary courage to simply live our lives. And so, what does care mean? Care means we don't want pity. We don't want charity. We don't want flowers once a year, every August. Care must become action. Care must become our institutions that are caring. Care must become greater opportunities for us. Care must become safety for us in this dangerous country we call South Africa. Care must become our economic independence. Care must become justice. For those women of 70 years ago, change was possible. And those women who must come after them, and that is us, we must never, ever, ever, ever waste their heritage. So, let us leave here. The 70 years of courage is not merely something that we will end just with a commemoration. It must be something that we inherit. And inheritance carries responsibility. The responsibility to speak, to organize, to build, to own, to lead, to care. The women of 56 proved what happens when women find their collective voice. So yes, Watinta Bafazi. We honor the rock. And 70 years later, let us also liberate the women underneath the rock, because we are not rocks. We are women, and I don't merely want us to enjoy the world that we have found. We must intend to help change it. For Healing Hands and the Community Project, congratulations on your 15 years of existence. Give them a hand. To the women of 1956, We thank them so much for their 70 years of courage. To the women of 2026, that's us, the clockers, this next chapter belongs to us. May we have the courage to write it, and may we care enough to ensure that the women who come after us do not have to fight every single battle all over again. Ngiyabulele.